Welcome to the Market Mystics podcast. I'm Joshua.
I'm Kim. Let's dive in. Welcome back, everyone.
There's this awkward silence where Kim and I are just staring at each other, waiting to see who's going to talk first so that we don't talk over each other. And then we talk over each other.
I know. Early on in the podcast, we did a lot of talking over each other. We've even had people who are like, I don't know how you guys flow so well together and you don't ever talk over each other. And it's like, we learned that
the hard way.
Go back to like episodes 1 through 10.
Or don't.
Or don't. Whatever. So how's it going, Josh?
It's a growing process, and we've come a long ways, and sometimes we revert back to old ways, but in general we do pretty good.
Try.
No, it's going well. I'm personally excited about slightly cooler weather. I enjoy it a little bit more than the hundreds of degrees, not hundreds, 100-degree weather that we've had. I do enjoy summer. I enjoy like a 90-degree summer.
That's fair. That's fair. I don't know why we always talk about the weather, but I feel like we're those like stereotypical friends who like, when you don't know what to talk about, you talk about the weather. But I really like hot weather, and I am kind of mourning a little bit the end of summer. It just happens. Every year it happens. The sun goes down sooner and sooner and earlier. And I'm just, I'm not a winter person. I'm just not.
I get it. Well, it'll be okay one way or the other, but
it'll be fun.
I think seasons are important, and I've learned to value seasons in ways that I didn't always.
Are you talking about natural seasons? Or are you talking about seasons in general, like seasons in your life?
Both. And I would say it's come from like one has built on the other, like learning to appreciate that there is it's going to sound like really cliche, but like, in I think it's Ecclesiastes. Solomon talks about there's a season for everything, a time to grow, a time to plant, a time to harvest. But whether or not we're talking about that in the natural, or if we're talking about that in the spiritual, I think it applies. And, I've had people, I've been around people who've been like, oh, you should always be in a season of growing or this or that. I think sometimes there are seasons that are, the purpose of them is simply to be still and to let the things that you planted like slowly build and grow and come to maturity before it's a time to like harvest them and utilize them. And I just think that there's that the season can apply to your spiritual walk, to your natural walk. I think it's an important thing to pay attention to. What season are you in?
I think so too. Do you think that there's ever a season of not growing? I was just thinking about, you said people like to say, you should always be in a season of growing, but there's value in some of the other processes. But then I think about, we live in middle America, so we have 4 seasons, right? The deciduous trees, they lose their leaves and then they look barren and dead throughout the winter, but they're still growing. It's just in a different kind of way, and it's kind of more underground and a bit more hidden than outwardly so. So I guess I'm applying that principle to what you're saying. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great point because it may not feel the same, may not look the same, but is there still progress being made? For sure.
Yeah, I think I feel that way. We've talked about a lot of times and in a lot of different episodes, like when you can feel a shift change, like coming, or seasons are changing, or something's coming, right? Like you can, it's almost palpable, it's almost tangible that you can feel this shifting of seasons. But I also think there are times in between where you're living out that season, but also when it's a slower change and it's not so palpable. But is there still progress? And I tend to think yes. I tend to be a person, which may change tomorrow, by the way. I tend to be a person who really thinks that one of the major parts of life is continually growing and continually learning. Um, I don't know.
I think, yeah, no, I think you're right in the way you're putting it because my mindset was like probably in growing, talking or looking at more visible growing. You know, the leaves are coming, the fruit is blooming, the grains, ready to be harvested. That's kind of where my mindset went for that. But there is like even when you put a seed in the ground and it dies, like it's still going through that process.
Right.
And so, yeah, there's still something being birthed in whatever season you are. And I think what's interesting is, if we're talking about these seasons, I personally feel like in a in a personal place, I'm coming into what I would say feels like things are coming out of the ground, things are growing. Maybe they haven't quite started producing fruit yet, but like there's some visible things coming out of the ground for what I've been working on. And so like that's kind of exciting time in our personal life. And I would say that's sort of where I feel like with the podcast, like we put a lot of work into it for a lot of years with not a lot of anything, and it's starting to come out of the ground. It's starting to take on more of a personality of its own, and um, I think it's fun to see that.
Mm. Yeah, I think so too. Um, I want to ask you a question about seasons. And I'm still really comparing to natural seasons of the earth with seasons of your life, right? Do
Mhm.
you think you can hold all four seasons at the same time? Like the sprouting and new growth of spring, and then the full lushness of summer, and then the stripping down of the autumn, and then kind of the barrenness of the winter. Do you think you can hold all of those at the same time with different things in your life or different concepts, different parts of who you are, different parts of your journey?
My gut instinct is yes, because it sometimes feels that way for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it makes me wonder if that's the way it should be, or if things would flow better if I got all of them aligned in the same way. But I know like different types of fruits, different types of grains, they have um, different seasons when they produce.
Mm-hmm.
And so there probably is things like that, but there's not a lot that is fruiting during the winter time. And I've heard a lot of things about this parable, not parable, story. Um, and so I don't actually know exactly what it means, but there is a story in the Bible of Jesus cursing a fig tree for not producing fruit when it says it was not the season to produce fruit.
Mm.
And so I don't exactly know what the significance of that was, or the cultural context of it, or the mystical meaning of it. I don't understand exactly what was going on there. But I know from just a literal this is what it says, there's something there. And so I have to believe to some extent that what you're talking about, yeah, like some things can always be in a season, not always. You can have things alternating, I think.
Mhm.
But part of me wonders, like, would everything flow better if that was lined up, or is that the way it's meant for aspects of your life to be in spring, summer, in different times so that it's not overwhelming? I don't know.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Like, is there a balance in some of that? Because if everything was sprouting and flowing all at the same time, and then you also had those times of like completely stripping everything off at the same time, it might be really overwhelming. But then it might not too. It might be that it's easier to flow in it because everything is going this direction at the same time. But I don't actually know. But I do wonder, can we hold some of those things in those different seasons at the same time? You know, I've had different times in my life with like uh, stripping off of my career. Like I was in corporate America for, I don't know, I was at the last place for 15 years. And when that was coming to an end, which was very much, it felt very much like autumn, you know, like things falling off. At the same time, other things were really starting to sprout that the Lord had planted in me. For instance, this company that Josh and I have together, he was really putting life into it. When I say he, I don't mean Josh, I mean the Lord. Like there was really life coming from it, and things were starting to like show new growth, which I would think is spring. So at the same time as autumn in one career, uh, kind of spring in the next at the same time. But was that a healthy thing? And did I actually need that to maintain balance? I think I did. Um, I see my dad has in the last year he retired and he owned his own company for 30 years, was the guy for all of that time, always busy, always had something to do, and then he retired and all of a sudden he doesn't know what to do with himself, right? So there was like that autumn moment, and it is now like he's in winter without having um the opposite to kind of balance it out. And I think that's where people tend to then uh I'm just I'm really waxing poetic about this, but I think a lot of times that's when people, when they don't have the balance, they start to question their identity and lose some of that about themselves. And maybe that's necessary
Mhm.
um in some of that stripping off, but is there something to balance it so that you don't completely lose yourself and your self-worth and the value that you hold? Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, and I think especially if you take it from the point of all things work together for good, like the seasons of stripping away, the seasons of growing, like they serve a purpose. And that balance that's was created for you, and having one thing kind of go away while another thing was started, helped shift your perspective to not just be focused on what was going away.
Right.
And I want to think, I'm sure there's still more growing to go, but that both of us have, we've gotten good at being flexible with God. And so when he says move and shift and adjust, we do it relatively easily.
Mhm.
Maybe not perfectly, but
Definitely not perfectly,
relatively.
not always graciously, but
Yes.
sometimes
But the
effectively.
movement still happens
Right.
generally for us. And so I think that's part of it is like, do I trust him to change my season in one area of life, believing that it's going to be spring in another season? Like,
I think that's exactly what we're getting to with this. And I also don't know that I believe that every season is the same length of time as the other,
sure,
right? So I might be having a spring and a fall at the same time, but they may not be the same amount of like
right.
length of time.
Well, and I was just thinking sometimes when things get stripped away and you're going through that winter season, it, it could be a week. Like it
Right.
doesn't need to be X amount of time, especially if we're talking about spiritual seasons. It could be a few days, it could be a week, could be a month or two, but like it doesn't, you know, and it's also possible that, I mean, I've seen this with other things in life where your harvest season, it could be years. Like, you know, things often, I would say spiritual seasons have a little bit less to do with the months of the year than anything else.
For sure. I mean, yeah. I don't think that we're talking about any kind of natural law in all of this. I
Mhm.
mean, here we've kind of figured some things out on earth, at least for the point in time in which we operate, right? So we think the earth turns at this rate while it rotates around the sun at this rate at 23 and a half degrees tilted. You know what I mean? Like we think we have those things figured out. And so it explains why there are certain lengths of time for this. But I think that when we're talking about spiritual stuff, especially like this, we're talking outside of the paradigm of time.
Mhm.
Though we could measure it here. I mean, you could make tick marks and like this day I'm in this season and this is what's happening with this part of my life. And you could measure it, but is it set up to be bound to a clock or a calendar? I don't think it is. And I don't think it ever will be, you
Yeah.
know?
Mhm.
I don't know. That's also interesting. Okay, so let me just shift a little bit. I just said all of that. And then if you look at Jesus in the wilderness, it was like 40 days, right? The Israelites in the wilderness, it was 40 years, right? So then there are things that are measured by a clock that have some synergy. And I know years and months are not the same, but there's still a number worked in there that is the
I,
same number.
you know, my personal belief is that God created the cosmos, that it tells time, that there's times and seasons are significant. Um, and I think numbers are important to God. Like, I think he's a great mathematician, and there is significance to when things happen and how long they happen. And um, I just don't know that it is bound to the same schedule as some of what we see on the earth is.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that it has to be dictated by time, but
Mm,
sometimes things align
yes.
in a very measurable and significant way. Maybe
Right.
that's how I should say it.
I think it's a great way to put it.
Interesting.
I saw this quote, um, and I don't remember if I sent it to you or not. I was going to. Um, but it said, millionaires do not believe in astrology, but billionaires do.
Hmm.
And the point of it was less to do with astrology and more to do, I would say, with understanding times and seasons. and when it's time to plant and when it's time to harvest. And um, there is, I don't necessarily think that you have to be bound to what the moon and the sun are doing, but I do think they're in those positions and affecting the earth for certain reasons. And understanding that, I think you can partner with that and use it to your advantage rather than being stuck and bound by it. And I just thought it was a really intriguing quote. I've not really dug a lot into it, or I don't know that I have firm beliefs on what I think about it, but it was interesting to be like, really at its root, what it was saying is you can become wealthy by just being good at business. But if you want to be extraordinarily wealthy, you got to understand how the whole universe works together.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really interesting thing to consider.
I think so too. It makes me think about, I mean, this concept of flow that we tend to talk about all the time. Uh, I think that there is this synergy, that there is this working together of the cosmos along with creation. Not that, I don't know, I'm not going to get into the semantics of what I just said and what it could imply, but I think there is, like, it works together, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, I don't know, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, there was this huge stinking moon, right? And
Yeah,
people were losing their ever loving minds, not about the moon and every other part of their lives, but it was obviously affecting people. I worked in the financial sector for a while,
mm-hmm.
and I dealt with customers a lot. And you could tell when there was a full moon, there would be all kinds of chaos. And I was not a believer in any kind of astrology or any of this stuff at that point. But more than one time, you'd be like, oh my gosh, is there a full moon or something? Because people are going crazy.
I've heard that with teachers. I've heard teachers say the same thing where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my gosh, it must be a full moon. Our students are going crazy.
Right.
And I just think it's something to pay attention to. I I'm not telling people to go like get into astrology and read horoscopes. Like, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there's significance in the way our world functions. And
Uh-huh.
if you pay attention to it, you'll see patterns with it.
I completely agree. And to the point with flow, I think that you could do yourself a favor and figure out how to work within that flow as opposed to fighting against that flow when it's happening. I think that's when
Mhm.
chaos ensues, is when you try to continue on with whatever's going on and go against the grain with that kind of stuff. How can you get into the flow and use it to help propel you forward? And I think that goes back to what you're talking about with the billionaires. So they believe in it, they understand it, and they know how to go with the flow when it's starting to pull one way or another. And you know what? On another topic, I was just saying this to Jason, my husband, when the moon was so crazy. Um, as Christians, in the traditional American church, we were always taught like astrology is the worst. You can't go by the stars on the moon. It's blah, blah, blah. It is the occult, all of that's what people say, right? But number one, does it not say that God created all of this? Number two, are we not all affected whether we want to be or not? We believe in high tide and low tide every day that is affected by the moon. And we agree that it is the moon that has to do with the pull of the water. Are we not also 75% water in our bodies? And are we not affected by the same thing? And so we could fight it and deny it and say it doesn't affect us and blame it on X, Y, and Z. Or we could say this does affect us. How do we work with it and get it to work for our benefit? God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And is that not one of those things that can be worked together?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. It's to me, it's kind of a, do you have to be bound by it as a son of God? No, I think there is a place where you are above all the princes and principalities of the world, but also he put them in place for a reason. And learning how to be in the flow of the natural thing, I think can only help you.
Right. Right. Well, think of all of the energy you have to expend to fight against it.
Mm.
So if you've decided you're not going to be subject to it, you're going to have to govern that spiritually. You're going to have to govern that physically. And that takes a lot of energy.
And
That
maybe
could,
there's seasons where it's needed.
correct. I would completely agree. But is it needed all the time?
Right.
Or is it more beneficial for you to, like I was talking about, like are you trying to swim upstream? Are you
Mm.
gaining little ground with way more energy output? Or are you putting your oar in the water and allowing, like, steering the ship as you go with the flow? Does that make sense at all?
It does. It does.
I think, and only you'll know what you're supposed to do. I will say that. I'm not going to tell you yes or no. You should always go with the flow. You should always not go with the flow. But I think there's something to it, and something to it in stepping into abundance and into next seasons and into the places you're supposed to go. Can you harness this extra push or pull or whatever you want to call it for your benefit and for the benefit of the kingdom?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so good. I think this conversation is, it's an important one to have. I I feel very uneducated in this area, but I think it's important to understand that these things exist and that God created them, and at some level you can learn how to utilize them. And that's, it's, I don't even know who to suggest people go learn from. Like, I don't learn from the Father, ask him. Like, because
That's it.
I
Yes.
because I don't, there's lots of information available, and I have no idea what of it um is written in his frequency or not. But I do believe in the Holy Spirit in each of you, which will lead you to all truth. And yeah, I don't think it has to be something complicated, something you're scared of. Like, I think learning to be a mature son means learning how to use the whole kingdom that your father created.
That is so good, Josh. I think we should wrap it up there. It feels like a good ending spot. But I hope you enjoyed this journey. This is like normal every day for us. This is a journey of conversation, right? What do we
It is.
believe? Why do we believe it? Where is it leading us? Let's talk through some of it. It may wind up being solid, but more likely it's going to spur us onto something else. And I hope it did the same for you.
That's right.
That's all I'm saying. Like, maybe we can be your friends who, like, help you think about something else from a different perspective. It's probably at the end of the day the most we could hope for, and get you to seek the Father about it. Just like Josh said, I think that's great.
It's perfect.
Okay.
All right.
We'll see you next time.
See ya. Thank you for sticking around. Listen for new episodes every Monday and Thursday. Find us on all social media platforms by searching for Market Mystics. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. Visit upperroomcd.com, where you can find more information about the hosts, projects, and guests. Go deeper by booking a coaching appointment focused on redefining identity and wealth in your life. See you next time.